Okay, awesome. So this week we're going to be working with advanced prototyping. Just a quick agenda. Here's the attendance link. I've also shared it in, or I can also share it in the Slack, but it's the same as always. And we'll give you guys the secret word at the very end. And here's the slide deck link, but I've also already put this in the Slack if you want to follow along. So just to recap, what is prototyping and what's it used for? So prototyping is the process of turning design concepts into tangible forms. They can be digital or physical and can be tested to reveal insights. So within the context of Figma and also other prototyping tools, it allows designers to demonstrate how interfaces will behave and account for how users will interact with interfaces. It can also be used as in something as mundane as a slide deck, and you can just prototype so you can click next and everything. So it's essentially forming connections between two objects within a frame. So it allows designers to define what happens when a user interacts with A and how A gets to B. There can be multiple connections made from one object or frame as long as each interaction has a different trigger. We'll cover this more, and then there can be multiple interactions made with different objects in the same frame. So like if you were to click D, you go to B, but also if you clicked A, you could go to B. Um, And then A could also go backwards to C as long as it's a different trigger, which we'll talk about more. And then these are the different components of a prototyping interaction. So triggers will determine which user interactions will result in which prototyped responses. So whether it's clicking it, whether it's hovering, pressing it, and then actions are reactions when triggers are activated, and they decide what happens after a trigger. So whether that's going to navigate to a new page, if it's going to open overlay, so something else will appear on the screen, but on the same frame. And these are all different options that you guys will be able to explore later. And then animations determine how the prototype moves from one frame to another. So it can be instant and it's just like a quick change. It can be dissolve, which it creates like a more seamless interaction. Figma also has smart animate where it'll sort of like interpret the object that you're trying to navigate from or to, and it kind of comes up with its own suggestion for the trajectory of the movement. And they also move in, push out, all these other options. And you'll find that as you're working, different animations work for different things, and it all depends on the goal of what you're trying to create. So general Figma animations can follow the movement or look of one of the options shown above, and the trajectory of these animations can be edited by customizing easing curves. Just to go backwards, this is the easing curve, and it's an option like when you click one of these animations, you'll get the option to adjust this as you see fit. So here are a couple illustrations of how it's moving. And Smart Animate, which is one of the animations. So Smart Animate looks for matching layers that exist across multiple frames. So for layers that match between frames, Figma will recognize what's changed and applies this transition to animate between them. So it looks for matching layers, and you can kind of see in this illustration how it's understanding like what the user's goal is based on like similarities across different frames. And you can also select Smart Animate from the list of transitions when building a prototype. And you can also apply Smart Animate with other transitions to create some seamless animations. It can also be used to create different types of animations, ranging from loading sequences, parallax scrolling, touch gestures, switches, drop downs, pull to refresh, and also illustrative purposes. So here are just a couple of examples of that. These are all things that have been animated using Smart Animate. So you see that little scrolling thing, the loading button, I mean. And here are some animation properties. So keyframes in animation are drawings that define the starting and ending points of any smooth transition, and they define what action of the frame it is at a certain point in time. So animations can be very complex to simulate lifelike movement. As you can see with the example with the ball, notice how it squashes and stretches because of its elasticity and its non-uniform trajectory and speeds. So each keyframe has to be drawn out and specified even with smart animation. You can see how we also like 5 doesn't simply go to 7. We have to see like the ball being squashed to see that elasticity be demonstrated in the illustration. So think of animation as the evolution of state over time and seeing how an object transforms via scale, rotation, color, etc. This helps us determine what keyframes we need to create for whatever animation we need to portray. So scale, if an object changes in size between frames, Figma will animate it shrinking or growing. Position, it will be able to recognize the object's location and the X and Y coordinates if those have changed, and it will then animate the object moving from its current position to its position in the destination frame. Smart Animate can also recognize a layer's or object's opacity, and you can adjust this to make an object appear or disappear between frames. And then Smart Animate also takes the layer's rotation and orientation into account. So rotate a single layer at once or rotate a group of them around a single anchor point, and you'll see the results, something like this animation right here. And then fill as well. So Smart Animate can add changes to an object's fill, and it allows you to animate changes between solid colors, gradients, and even image fills. And this leads into advanced prototyping. So transitions. Smart animations are defined using the transition tool in the prototype panel. So when we connect two frames to create an interaction, we can specify to use smart animation, as you can see in the little animation on the right, on the left. And how to do this. So you can open the prototype tab in the right sidebar. So in your design panel at the very top, you should see something that says prototype, and then you can connect two frames together to create an interaction. You can define the interaction in the right sidebar by choosing a trigger or an action right here. And then in the animation section, you can select Smart Animate or any others, but specifically for Smart Animate. And you can apply easing to the transition or change the duration, which is optional, and repeat for any other frames you want to smart animate. This duration part is will specify how long you want this animation to last. So when combining transitions with smart animate, if you want to do it with some layers in your prototype while using another main transition, you can check a box to smart animate matching layers. And the layers that don't match, Figma will use the main transition you select. And then layers that do match, Figma will smart animate any differences for supported properties. And then since Figma matches layers when using Smart Animate, it's important to keep track of your layer names between transitioning frames. Otherwise, you might yield unexpected results. So this is just making sure that all of your things are organized in on your left sidebar. That way you're never mixing up what you're animating, mixing up the groups that you're in or in the frames that you're in. And as a result, when we preview our transition, we see how content moves from one frame to the next. And notice how the navigation bar's focus shifts while remaining fixed to the bottom. This is via Smart Animate. And then while the screen pushes left, which is via transitions. So here's some examples of different ways animations can work. And then renaming layers. So layer matching. Before Smart Animate, Figma didn't place much importance on layer names, as Smart Animate is reliant on layer name and hierarchy. This requires you to pay attention to your layer names. And luckily, there's an easy way to rename your layers. So rename layer model, you can view and update your layer names using the layers panel in the left sidebar. And then by right-clicking on the layers you want to rename and choosing rename with Control or Command R, you can add rename every layer to the exact same name or add a suffix and or prefix. You can also double-click any layer name and fix it to whatever makes sense to you as well. And to view matching layers, you can see what layers are objects that exist in other frames or parts of your files. And then when you go to the prototype panel and hover over an object or layer in the frame, Figma will highlight other layers in the frames that it exists in. And this is just really helpful when you're debugging smart animation, because sometimes when you have a bunch of lines moving around a page, it can get really confusing what is connected to what. So this is a really helpful tool to make sure that everything is organized and you can easily access any errors in your prototyping. Animation in UX. So animation should remain functional and serve a purpose to aid the user and not detract from their focus. So functional animation establishes well-thought hierarchy and relationships between groups of information. Animation must feel natural, similar to how we model and animate objects. So to a certain extent, animations follow the rules of physics via weight and speed, and you can use curves to achieve this effect. Here's case one. So a good way to indicate to the user an action has been performed is to use animation. For example, if you have a list of posts that have loading, sliding up can help the user understand to swipe to see more. And then animations have practical developments too, such as asynchronous loading times of information. With subtlety, a good animation is one that the users don't even notice. So the purpose of animation is to help the user achieve a specific objective in a simple, intuitive manner. And then animations should not be at the forefront of the visual experience. Orientation. So it's practical to think of your screens taking on 2D space like your prototype frames in your Figma file. And then animations should provide a consistent sense of spatial orientation to make applications easily navigatable. And then animation should be a part of the prototyping process. So understanding how information flows and transitions from one section to the next is an important factor to UX and content-driven design. So I mean, at this point, you guys have probably been using the apps on your phone for a long time, but if something were to change, or if maybe a button isn't always where you expect it, it's something you're going to notice. And then the animation will just lose the user flow, and users won't know what to click next, where to scroll to, if these things aren't built already in it with an intuitive manner. And just to recap with variables, so variables are reusable definitions like styles that can be assigned to various design attributes like colors, numbers, and strings. And then unlike styles, variables can switch between definitions depending on the theme that is applied. Variable types. So when you're creating a variable, you'll see 4 different types available. So color, number, string, and Boolean. And then variables can be applied to layers and objects using fields in your right design sidebar. And then when applying variables, these are to be stored locally in libraries. And then to apply a variable, you can start by selecting a layer or an object on the canvas. And then depending on the type of variable you're using, it will be applied to a different parts of the right side panel. So color will be separate from like number or like Boolean and things like that. And then prototyping with variables. This is before variables and this is after variables. So variables are a really easy way to make sure that everything is consistent and you don't need to make like 10 different pages just to give 10 different options. You can use variables and your user will, or you, the designer, will already have all the options available within one frame, for example. And then variable values. So all prototyping interactions have triggers. What interaction causes the prototype to advance forward, and actions, which is what happens as a result of the trigger. And then variables introduce a new action type where any of the available triggers can update the value of a chosen variable to the value of your choice, which is set variable. And then how to add this set variable, you can go to the prototype tab and select your chosen frame and click on the plus icon to add an interaction. You'll select your trigger and then set variable in the action dropdown. Next, you'll pick the variable that is going to be modified, and then you can type in the new value you're changing this variable to, or choose an option from the drop-down suggestions. Press enter, and you're done. Expressions are operations, mathematical functions that involve values. So these can be used to generate dynamic variables, and you can write expressions directly inside the field of the interaction modal using supported syntax rules, or you can use the drop-down selection picker to choose from the suggested variables and operators, like we can see right here. And then conditionals. Conditional logic allows you to define different outputs depending on user input. So if they're enabling a button and all the fields are correctly filled, or showing an overlay if a user has not selected an option. In order to add conditional logic to a prototyping action, you can select the new action type, conditional. And the conditional follows the format of if or else. So if some condition is met, then an action is taken, or else another action is taken. And then variable modes. In the context of prototyping, you can think of modes as groups of values for the same variable, and the different mode values can be used in prototyping actions for easier customization. So here are some ways that variable modes work. So set mode values based on the context. You can use multiple modes to customize your variable values without needing to edit or create new interactions. And then you can use modes in expression. So use the values of a different modes to build interactions and perform calculations. And yeah, I know this is a pretty heavy lecture today. But yeah, a lot of this is, I would say again, very a hands-on thing that you can learn, and it'll come to you a lot easier through working on this within your lab. So make sure you're going to your labs, make sure you're asking and watching your instructor, your TAs when they're showing you examples. And yeah, homework will be Smart Animate Pokedex. So it's a pretty fun homework assignment, I would say. You're finding a Pokemon and you're just animating between. I th I think it's like a Pokemon card or online database of Pokemon cards. You're just redesigning that. And then lab 8 will be smart home prototyping. And yeah, let me stop this recording.